thought I'd do a rather quick review of one of David Glantz's books. I've been reading a bunch of his books in the past 6 months or so, probably maybe like 10 or 12 of his books. And this is one I enjoyed quite a bit because it's about pretty obscure battles. And so they always call this, I think, this is mostly about the first Targu Frumas. I'm sure that pronunciation's a bit off, but that's one of the things you're going to have to deal with a book like this, because the names of these towns in Romania and Moldova, they are very hard to master for like an English speaker, but it shouldn't be that difficult. It's a battle, or a series of battles that have kind of been swept up under the rug in terms of Soviet attention. So it's, David Glantz is mostly focuses on the Soviet perspective. So I think he had some difficulty finding sources for this book, but he does a pretty good job of it's more of a narrative style book. Some of his books are not. The first two books I've read of his were the Second Battle of Kharkov, of course, on Shevchenkovsky Offensive, and those are both really just translated Soviet general staff studies, and I think they're from shortly after the war. So they're kind of difficult to read. There's definitely a slant to them, of course, but this book I really enjoyed it, actually, and it's one I'd probably read again maybe in a few years. It has a lot of information, and the maps are out. A lot of people disparage his maps. A lot of his maps are actually very good, but the two books I mentioned before, the Kharkov and Korsun Shevchenkovsky Offensive, those have very difficult to read maps, difficult to decipher. And this has a lot of information about Operation Sonia and Katya, which are kind of obscure Soviet or obscure German victories, tactical victories, which happened near the end of this first Yassy-Kishinev offensive. So, and you can see the maps are not difficult to decipher at all. So this is probably one of the few sources you're going to be able to find on those two operations in English. Even online, you're not going to be able to find much information, even if you dig in the deepest bowels of the Russian internet. So if you're interested in battles, those two battles especially, or just this overall battle as a whole, I would recommend picking it up. It has a lot of these orders of battle, of course, which is pretty important. There's the appendix, some documents written by Stalin himself, or possibly. And then there was, there's a lot of mention of, they talk about the Odessa offensive too, a bit. It's mostly on the operations after that, the Dniester River and the bridgehead battles. But they talk about how Chuikov's army had to move because their initial attack positions were flooded, or they were, I think he even mentioned how they were up in the trees basically with the crows or something to that effect. The water level was so high from the Dniester River, I think it was, so they had to move north to attack during one of the first battles. So you can see it goes from about April to June, but it's pretty easy to read book. It's not that long. I always check to see where it actually ends, because there's not that many notes compared to some of his other books, and the appendix is kind of brief too. But if you're interested in obscure, and this is one of the more obscure Soviet operations, definitely pick this up. This one came from the library. I mostly get my books from the library through the interlibrary loan, and this came from Lucas County. So I live in Cincinnati. I came other end of the state, which is a great free service. I think a lot of libraries have in the U.S. So we'd definitely pick this up. I would even buy this book too, just because there's so few books on subjects like this in English. That is Red Storm over the Balkans.